it's not unusual. In this whole Tea Party thing, I meet a lot of folks who've come from other countries who are absolutely passionate about America and the ideal of America, and Trevor is definitely one of them. So with that, I'm bringing on Trevor Loudon. Hey, Trevor.
Hi, Steve. How are you? Thanks for having me on, and thanks to all the Allen area Patriots. I hope to catch up with you later on in the year sometime. Now, tonight I want to talk about the looming communist threat to America. In May, Donald Trump Jr. was on Fox and Friends, and he said the 2020 election will be communism versus freedom. Now, a lot of people thought that was a little bit over the top, that what are you talking about? Liberalism, socialism, maybe, but communism, that was a bridge too far for them. But I want to try and convince you people by the end of this show that he was right. This is the choice we face. And I want to explain how that could play out, how close we are to it, and how we can fight back. All critical steps, because I don't want you coming away from here depressed. I want you coming out of this, pumping the air and saying, we can do this. We can take this back. So what do I mean by communism? Well, the communism of today is not the communism of the 1920s or the 1950s. The leading force of the world communist movement now is China, but Russia is still very much in there. They're allies with China. And while they don't call themselves communist, they work in every way the old Soviet Union used to do. Even as late as 2017, Vladimir Putin keynoted a conference in Sochi, Russia, for 30,000 young communists from all over the world, including from the United States. And he told them the future was theirs. The event was to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. But whether the Russians are openly communist or not, they are working with China in Venezuela, they're working with Cuba, they're working with all the old front groups. They have the same foreign policy they had under Khrushchev or Brezhnev or Stalin. And their goal is to destroy the United States completely. I don't mean dominate the United States, I mean destroy the United States. Now, there's a number of aspects to this, but I just want people to understand, I'll talk about elections shortly. I want people to understand how easy it would be for the hard radical left to take over America. Now, Mitt Romney lost his election by 2.5 million votes in 2012. Donald Trump in 2016 won his election by about 300,000 or 400,000 votes, and actually, thanks to the wisdom of your founding fathers and the Electoral College, and actually lost the popular vote by nearly 3 million, mainly out of California. So right now in this country, there are roughly 22 million illegal immigrants. That's according to Massachusetts Institute of Technology. They've been telling us 11 million for years. Well, MIT says 22 million. Some people say 40, 45 million. But let's just go with the conservative figure out of MIT. So 22 million. Hillary Clinton promised to give all of those people citizenship and voting rights within 100 days of taking office, right? Within 100 days. That would have given 22 million people the right to vote. I would contend they would vote 80 to 90% Democrat, maybe more. That would give the Democrats, 17, 18, 19 million new voters overnight. Instantly, you would lose Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, and not long after, Texas. And when that happens, folks, you tell me how long it would be before the Democrats and their communist allies had complete and utter control of this country forever. They could do to the whole country what they've done to California, but only you've got nowhere to run, and they would go way beyond what they've done to California. They would turn you into Venezuela. then Cuba, as quickly as they possibly could. Because these people are after power, folks. These are the people who marched for the Viet Cong in the 60s. These are the people who supported the Sandinistas in the 80s and Castro in the 90s. They want their revolution before they die, folks. And one more election that goes the wrong way, will give it to them until we've turned things around considerably. Now, I want to talk about the opening stages of World War III, which are happening right now. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to get into a shooting war right now. It may not get into a shooting war, but we are in World War III. And the latest stage in that battle is the massive campaign around the COVID virus. Now, just think about this. You know, I don't know whether the COVID virus was deliberately caused or it was an accident, but it was almost certainly genetically engineered in one of the in a viral laboratory in Wuhan, China, where they experiment on viruses for military purposes. The Chinese war doctrine since 1999 has been to use viruses to bring America to its knees. So it's a real cheap way of doing it, folks. You know, if you're a Chinese leader, are you going to risk billions of dollars on a trade war? Or are you going to risk trillions on a shooting war with America as it is now? Or are you going to spend a few $1 million producing a virus that brings America to its knees? What would you do? What's less risky? So, you know, Trump was caning China on trade. The Taiwanese election had gone the wrong way for China. The anti-communist had won. They were very embarrassed over the riots in Hong Kong. And they would have been thinking, can we handle 4 more years of this crazy guy Trump? You know, he'll destroy us. We'll have a revolution in our own territory. They'll hang us from the lampposts. What are we going to do? And then the virus comes along. Trump's riding high, the economy's cooking, is looking good for re-election, and then bang comes the virus. Now, you'll remember in the first bit of time, you know, the Chinese said, no, it's not communicable between humans. They totally kept it under wraps. And another very significant thing, in January, they have the Chinese New Year celebrations in Wuhan. Massive event. It's sort of like a Chinese Mardi Gras. And people come from all over the world for it. Expat Chinese from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, Britain, France, Italy. They come back to Wuhan for a big party. Now, the local Wuhan authorities asked the Chinese Communist Party, should we cancel this event in light of this unknown virus that's spreading in our area? The Chinese Communist Party said, no, go ahead. So tens of thousands of people come in there, and they all went back to Florida and New York and Canada and Singapore and South Korea, wherever they were working, and bang, it was all over. Just like that. The Chinese, at the least, are guilty of extreme negligence, but almost certainly they are guilty of an act of war on the United States and the Western world. Only an act that can't be definitively pinned on them. They've got a little bit of wiggle room. You know, they can't back out of sending bombs here. They can have a bit of wiggle room with viruses. So initially the Democrats were going, oh, Trump's crazy. Look, he's shutting down trade with China. Ocasio-Cortez says, look, if you don't go to Chinese restaurants in Manhattan, you're a racist. Nancy Pelosi took people on tours of Chinatown in San Francisco. You know, Trump's an ogre. Look at this crazy Trump. But then the word came down. No, we are going to weaponize this. And this came from China. You know, recently Tucker Carlson had on his show a former CIA officer, a Democrat, who said that the Democrats are totally following the Chinese line on coronavirus. And Tucker said, why? Well, why? And And he said, well, some of them are idiots, useful idiots, but I got to say, I think some of them are paid Chinese agents. So immediately the tone changed, and this was panic stations. There's going to be 2 million deaths. We got to quarantine everybody. We got to shut it all down. And Trump was faced with the choice. If I don't shut this down, I'm going to be blamed for every dead grandmother between now and the election. The hysteria forced him into it. And whether it was a good response or not, I don't believe it was a good response. But some people might quibble with that. But he was forced into it. Now, to his great credit, he's saying if there's another wave, he's not shutting down because he's realized what this is about. So the Chinese on April 2nd issued a letter from the Chinese Communist Party International Department, signed by 230 worldwide communist parties, including Communist Party USA, which is way more powerful than you think. And this letter had 4 themes. First, it's not China's fault. If anybody blames China, they're racist. Have you heard that anywhere? Second, China's leading the world in solving this problem. We're giving ventilators and we're doing this. China's the champion here. Third thing, socialized healthcare is the way to go. This is why China can handle this, because socialized healthcare is the way to get on top of these things. Look at the terrible United States. They don't have socialized healthcare. What a mess they are. Fourth message, blame Trump, blame America, blame Trump, blame America, blame Trump, blame America. Have we heard any of this? This is completely generated by China. And the media is falling in, and the Democrats are falling in, because all of them want to destroy President Trump, right? The Democrats want to destroy Trump. The media wants to destroy Trump. So does Hollywood. So do the unions. So they're all piling in on those propaganda themes. Now, the Democrats want to destroy Trump and take power. The Chinese want to take it a step further, because President Obama gutted the US military. He weakened it more than any world war could probably do. It was a disgrace what he did to the military. And the only thing stopping Russia and China ruling this planet is the US military and the ability of US taxpayers to fund and back it. That's it. That's all that's standing between you and destruction. The Chinese are arming like crazy. The Russians have been arming like crazy for 20 years now. They're ahead of you in a whole bunch of metrics, including nuclear weapons, both in quality and quantity. And they're getting ready. And they want America to be weak. Because why not just let America get really weak before you strike? So Trump, to his credit, has seen the danger. And he's been doing his darndest to rebuild the US military as quick as possible. He built the budget up, he's taken the transgender garbage out of the military and all this communist stuff that's been pumped into them. But he can only do that on the back of a strong economy. What happens when we're in major depression, when we're in unemployment? We've got 30% unemployment. You think Trump's going to get an increased defense budget through the Congress and the Senate then? Already, 30 Democrats all communists, Barbara Lee, Mark Pocan, etc., have signed a letter to the Armed Services Committee demanding military budget cuts in the next election. This is about giving Russia and China a military advantage over the United States. That's why they are driving this. If they can destroy the US military, you're done. We're done. New Zealand is done. Australia's done. Canada's done. Europe's done. All of us will be at the mercy of the Russians and Chinese. This is their end game. And we got to confront this. This is not a public health issue. This is not even an economic issue. This is a military and survival issue. That's what the Chinese and their Russian allies are doing and why they're driving the propaganda, the hysteria, and the fear around this outbreak. I'm not saying it's not a serious outbreak, but even when we had polio and malaria and, smallpox, you only ever quarantined the sick. You don't quarantine. We've never shut down the economy before. That's just insane. The deaths, the suicides, the people who miss their operations and other medical treatment, the deaths out of that are going to be far worse than the deaths from COVID if we carry on this insane course of action. And thankfully, President Trump is doing his best to get us out of that, but we have to keep the pressure on to make sure that happens really quick. If we spent 10% of the money that we've just lost on protecting the vulnerable, we'd all be way better off. Way, way, way better off. Much more intelligent way to handle things. But Trump got basically bulldozed into doing this. Now he wants out, but he wants the people behind him so he doesn't get blamed for every dead grandma between now and the election. And the media will do that. It's up to us to build the pressure. So that's the beginning stage of World War III. This is this is a step. And if the Chinese succeed in this, they will push it further. So they cannot be allowed to succeed. We must return the president, rebuild the economy, and up the military budget quite considerably, and rebuild ties with Taiwan and our other allies around the world, and basically put the pressure on the Chinese, make them collapse before we do. It's going to be one or the other.
Just real quick, have you read that speech that was given by the Chinese equivalent to the Department of Defense minister, basically laying out what you just said?
Laying out biological warfare as a means of taking America. And they say, America's been good to us, and it's going to be horrible to wipe America out. But it's us or them. We are running out of space. We have to settle our people on their land. They don't want to just dominate us. They want to replace you. And if they can wipe out 20% of you see what'll happen if there's a major, if they do this again with something even worse and it wipes out 20% of the people, the economy will collapse. Then then the other 80% will die of starvation or an invasion, one or the other. The Chinese are not going to sit back and wait for you to rebuild your civilization.
No,
they're not going to do that. So coming to the election now, why is the election so critical? Well, I think I've sort of hinted at a little bit. Donald Trump recently said that if Joe Biden, God forbid, wins the election, he will sell this country to China. And yes, he will. Absolutely. And I want to talk a little bit about Joe Biden, and just doing that, I know there's people watching this. You've probably seen my other books, but this is my latest. It's called White House Reds, Communists, Socialists, and Security Risks, standing for the US Presidency 2020. White House Reds, Communists, Socialists, and Security Risks. And I want you all to get a copy, folks, because if you're in a war, the first thing you got to know is you're in one. And the second is you've got to know your enemy. Well, this will do both. Because what I do is I show the complete communist takeover of the Democratic Party. See, the line they've tried to pull, this is the scam they've tried to pull. Look, the crazy left were taking over the Democratic Party under Bernie Sanders, but we united, us moderates united, and we kicked the crazy communist out. Now it's back to good old blue-collar, moderate Democrats. Complete and utter scam. Yes, they united to get rid of Bernie because he was an honest communist. Not because he was a communist, because he was too obvious about it. And they knew they were going to get a drubbing in the polls. They would probably lose the House, and he'd lose even more seats in the Senate with Bernie at the top. With Biden at the top, They might lose the presidency, but they won't lose as much elsewhere. That's what their reasoning is. And with Biden there, they can probably replace him before or after the election with someone else. And whoever is his VP will effectively be the president anyway. But what this book does, it shows all the major communist strands inside the Democratic Party. It's not just one. You got a Maoist pro-Chinese strand. You got the pro-Russian strand. You got the Iranian radicals. You've got the Democratic Socialists, which are communists. And you've got a couple of other little bits and pieces, but the main ones are the mainstream communist, pro-Russian, pro-Chinese, and the Democratic Socialists. Klobuchar comes out of the Democratic Socialist. Pete Buttigieg comes out of the Democratic Socialists. Elizabeth Warren comes out of Democratic Socialists and a little bit of the Maoist wing. Julian Castro came out of the pro-Russian wing. Let's see, who else is there? Bernie comes out of the Democratic Socialist wing, but also has extensive ties to the pro-Soviet wing. Even as late as a year ago, his leading members of his organization were being trained in New York by an organization called the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, which is the Manhattan branch of the Berlin-based Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, which is funded by the German taxpayer, but owned 100% by a political party called Die Linke, the left. It used to be called the East German Communist Party. East German Communist Party copies were training Bernie Sanders people. He had ties to the Norwegian communists, Brazilian communists, French communists, Italian communists, and Cuban communists. Bernie Sanders' movement is a communist movement, but it's just one of the strands of the communist movement, and it's too much of an obvious strand. So the other strands, who've been going for a lot longer and were a lot more entrenched, united and kicked this upstart to the curb because they knew he would take them down or he would take them over, one or the other. So Joe Biden, the survivor. Now Joe was chosen because all the others couldn't do what he could do. He knew he was useless, but at the time, Buttigieg was never going to win. Klobuchar was never going to lead the ticket. Biden was the only one who could lead the charge against Sanders. So they used him, and they'll keep using him while he's mentally reasonably competent or until they get someone to replace him. I think what'll happen, he'll choose his VP, and the VP will run like Sarah Palin did with John McCain. She'll be the star, and she will be the president in everything but name only if that ticket is elected. And maybe they'll even take Biden right out of the picture. I wouldn't be surprised at that either. But anyway, Joe Biden. In 1972, Joe Biden, Mr. Moderate blue-collar Democrat, was a 29-year-old city councillor in a little town in Delaware. And he decided to run against a 4-term incumbent Republican senator with an 81% approval rating and no money. Biden had no money, not the senator. So who would do that? Okay, so he ran against him and he won. Because a group called the Council for a Livable World came to him and raised about $90,000 of his $287,000 budget. Now, $287,000, $90,000 in Delaware in 1972 is a lot of money. That's big money. And they gave him a lot of credibility in Washington. They brought a lot of people in for him, and he just won. Okay, so who's the Council for a Livable World? Well, the guy who actually picked him out was the head of the Council for a Livable World. His name was Al Gore Sr. You might have heard of his son. He invented the internet and global warming, okay? So Al Gore Sr. was a very corrupt senator from Tennessee who had just lost office and became president of the Council for a Livable World. Now, his protege, his mentor, was a man called Armand Hammer. He made Al Gore rich. He made him millions of dollars, and he was his boy in the Senate. Armand Hammer was a leading Soviet agent of the early 20th century. He was the head of Occidental Petroleum. He was the man who kept the Soviet Revolution alive by trading with Lenin, who was a personal friend of Lenin. Now, the Council for a Livable World was set up by a man called Leo Szilard, a Hungarian communist who moved to the United States, escaped the Nazis, came to the United States, and became a Manhattan Project physicist. He helped to develop the US atomic weapon. He was one of many communists working on that project, most of them leaking to the Soviets, which is how the Soviets got their atomic weapon. Now, Leo Szilard was identified as a security risk, but they couldn't get rid of him because he was right up there. And after the war, he set up the Council for a Livable World, and their goal was to gather money and elect, with a little bit of money, you can elect a senator in a tiny state like Delaware or Rhode Island. You can do it cheaply, or South Dakota or New Hampshire or Maine. Like you couldn't do that in Texas, you couldn't do that in California. With a little bit of money, you can elect a senator. So they set out to elect far left senators who would vote for US nuclear disarmament and the gutting of the US military. Now, later in 1994, a man called Pavel Sudoplatov published his book on his life as a leading Soviet spy. He was one of the top men under Stalin of a special KGB unit. And he wrote how that he had helped to run Szilard as an agent during World War II. He was a fully recruited Soviet agent. And that after the war, Beria, Stalin's secret police head, had said, don't run these guys anymore as spies. The FBI's sniffing around their heels. We'll lose them. Use them instead to generate political influence and to get the US to disarm. Because if the US disarms, we run the world. So Szilard set the Council for a Livable World up to disarm the United States, to buy left-wing senators who would then vote to gut the US military to the benefit of the Soviet Union. And one of their greatest achievements was Joe Biden. Probably their second greatest achievement was Barack Obama. So, because they were a bit bigger by the time Obama got elected, they were starting to go into bigger states. But anyway, Biden boasts of all the look. I've got a video. It's on my YouTube video. It's on my video, Enemies Within. You can see it on Amazon Prime. 2 million people have seen it, about the communist infiltration of the US Congress and Senate. And anyway, I've got Biden on there on tape saying this in 2012. I have worked with the Council for a Livable World all of my career. They've been with me every step of the way. I owe them such a depth of gratitude. They were there for me when I was head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. They helped me negotiate this treaty and that treaty and whatever. They helped me and Obama negotiate the START treaty with Moscow, the treaty that Trump had to cancel because it was so advantageous to the Russians. He basically admitted to treason right there. You know, Joe Biden was Reagan's big enemy in the 80s and 90s. He was always going to the Soviet Union. He fought Reagan over the communist advances in Latin America. Him and Kerry were regarded as two of the most left-wing senators. And then he becomes the vice president to America's second communist president. Bill Clinton was first, but the second. You're telling me a moderate's going to be the vice president to that guy for 8 years? Joe Biden is a complete and utter traitor to this country. one of the worst senators ever to serve. And he's being sold as the moderate. Of the 23 Democrats who stood, 13 of them were Marxists, including 11 of the top 10. The only one who wasn't was Bloomberg, and he was crazy, a gun grabber, loved communist China, and may as well have been a communist. We would have gone communist slower under him. Business would have survived a bit longer, but he would have still done us in. But Biden is a menace. We are one bad election away from losing this country, folks. What we need to do is smash the Democrats in this election, then let the president loose on the left, defund the left, abolish the Department of Education, get the kids out of the control of the communists, go through all their left-wing organizations and defund them, and most seriously of all, go after the hundreds, probably thousands of traitors working for the Chinese, the Iranians, the Cubans, the Russians, the North Koreans in this country right now. They say there's at least 25,000 Chinese spies. That's just the Chinese spies. You know, and you see Dianne Feinstein, the head of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate. It was revealed a couple of years ago that her driver, so she said, my driver, the FBI exposed him as a 20-year Soviet Chinese spy. But this is the truth. He wasn't her driver. He was her office manager. I have seen Defense Department documents to her with him CC'd on them. Drivers don't get that stuff. He was her office manager. But see, you know, Feinstein was working with the Soviets in the 50s and the 60s. Even when she was at Stanford University, she invited 7 Soviet journalists to tour the United States. She worked with the Russians. Then when they faded, she threw in with the Chinese. She got their most favored trading status, which built their economy, which built their military, which we're now having to defend ourselves from. She didn't need a Chinese spy in her office. She was already giving them everything they wanted. You know, Judy Chu from California, you know, on the, long-time leader of the supporter of the Communist Workers' Party, pro-Chinese Maoist party, goes to China all the time, described as China's best friend in your Congress. And so, you want to see Judy Chu on the Judiciary Committee when she attacked, when the FBI arrests one of the more than 25,000 Chinese spies here. You are racist, she says. The FBI is a racist organization. You're only persecuting these people because you hate Chinese. And she has arranged for sensitivity training for these cruel FBI agents so they don't persecute these poor Chinese any longer. And to think of the Judiciary Committee, because people will be saying to me, oh, look, you're crazy, Loudon. You know, there's no way the FBI would allow radicals and communists and traitors and spies to serve in the US Congress and the US Senate. This could not happen. You know, we saw, you know, well, I say, well, you saw how tough they were with Hillary Clinton, right? You saw how they put their careers and their pensions before, you know, before the national security of this country. They went after Hillary Clinton with no mercy, right? No, they gave her a complete free pass for treason because she could have been their boss. Are they stupid or what? They're not going to risk everything by persecuting someone who might get elected. You know, so look at the Judiciary Committee, right? Now that is the body in Congress that oversees the FBI and the Justice Department. The FBI is supposed to catch the bad guys. The Justice Department is supposed to prosecute them. Well, how's that been going recently? So think about this. The man who headed the Judiciary Committee for almost 40 years was a man called John Conyers from Michigan, left-wing Democrat. John Conyers had a 50-year history with the Communist Party USA, 40 years with Democratic Socialists of America, 30 years with the Workers' World Party, which supports North Korea and Cuba and Iran, and was also very, very in with a whole bunch of Muslim Brotherhood front groups. He was the man who abolished your House Un-American Activities Committee, I'm sure on the orders of the Soviet Union, one of your last lines of defense. Okay, also on that committee, and he was the head of it for 40 years. Also on that committee, you had Luis Gutierrez from Illinois, Mr. Amnesty Man, a former member of the pro-Cuban Marxist-Leninist Puerto Rican Socialist Party, a Communist Party supporter, and a Muslim Brotherhood supporter. On that committee right now, you have Judy Chu. And, you know, Sean Hannity's been all upset recently because, you know, you got a socialist in Congress now, Ocasio-Cortez. How could you have a socialist in Congress? How could this be allowed to happen? This has never happened before. Absolute garbage. Jerry Nadler, the man who runs the Judiciary Committee, heavily involved in the attempted impeachment of your president, has been a member of Democratic Socialists of America, a Marxist group, since at least 1977. He's a communist, effectively. So the FBI, which, by the way, hasn't invested congressmen for treason or espionage since World War II, if ever. So the FBI decides, look, we know some of our people, the congressmen, are taking money from the Iranians, which is why you have an Iran nuclear deal. We know a lot of them are working with the Cubans, which is why the Cuban Obama liberalized trade with Cuba. We know a lot of them work with the North Koreans, which is why Trump went and, well, basically why governments have gone easy on North Korea. We need to start investigating these people. We need to go to the Judiciary Committee and tell them this. Mr. Nadler, Mrs. Chu, we're the FBI. We need to investigate your colleagues because we know some of them are working for the other team. Is that all right by you? Can we have some money for that? And by the way, Mrs. Chu and Mr. Nadler, you're both on the investigation list. You cool with that? What do you think is going to happen to their budget next year? Do you think the FBI would be stupid enough to do that? So if you're a young communist radical and you get elected to Congress, there's no media scrutiny. There's no background checks at all in Congress, none, zilch, zero, even for the Intelligence Committee. And the FBI doesn't dare touch you. I'll give you another example. Andre Carson is a congressman, a Muslim congressman from Indiana. Very tied in with the Muslim Brotherhood, very tied in with several Marxist groups, Communist Party, USA, DSA, etc. So in 2012, again, he's in my movie, Enemies Within. He's at a Muslim Brotherhood front group convention in Connecticut. And he gets up and he says something like this. He says, hey guys, look, I've been told there's people in the audience spying on us. They're here undercover. Because they believe, you know, these right wingers, they believe we are here plotting to destroy this country. Well, I say to you people undercover, this is what I tell you. Allah will not allow you to stop us. This man serves on the Intelligence Committee right now. Nancy Pelosi put him there. He oversees the CIA, the FBI, the DSA, the NSA, DEA, all 16 of your intelligence agencies. There are at least 4 Marxists on intelligence. There are at least 4 Marxists on Homeland Security, including the chairman, Benny Thompson, a big Cuba supporter. Same in armed services, same in education, same in environment. All of them are controlled by Marxists. There are at least 100 Marxists in the US House right now. People who are so enmeshed with Cuba or North Korea or the Communist Party USA or whatever that they couldn't pass an FBI background check to drive a school bus. But there are no background checks in Congress. So they're home and free. They're free. Nobody's going to touch them. You think the Russians would tolerate 100 American patriots in their Duma? You think the Chinese would tolerate 100 American spies in their Communist Party assembly or whatever they call it? Well, we do. We tolerate the enemy right inside. That's why your founding fathers warned you to guard against all enemies, foreign and domestic. and the domestic are far and away the worst, far and away. Now, I want to talk a little bit about now the infiltration. This is why we got to win the election, people. We have to win. This is, if we will lose this election, this is not going to be like France or Germany, folks. They are not going to allow you to rebuild and get them out of power one more time. Trump was a huge wake-up call for them. They didn't expect it. They were so arrogant. They thought they had it in the bag. Well, now they've taken away our social media. They're coming down on our, suppressing us, coming after our businesses. They're doing everything they can to suppress Trump's base, including wrecking the economy, deliberately wrecking the economy. I heard a friend the other day, she was had a friend in Congress. She says, every time the unemployment figures come out and they're up, the Democrats are walking around going, yeah, right on, yeah. Because this brings them closer to victory. They would rather win with 40 million unemployed Americans than lose with 2 million unemployed Americans. Absolutely. You saw what they were like at the State of the Union speech. Trump says, black unemployment's the lowest it's ever been. And they all scowled. Even the black Democrats scowled. Not a cheer, not a right on, yeah, attaboy, not one. So I want to talk a little bit now before I close up about the churches, because my next project is Enemies Within the Church. It's about 90% completed. We're still looking for about 20% of the funding. It's got a $350,000 budget. We're still looking for another $40,000 or $50,000. And I know there are people here on listening right now who know someone who could probably spend that on a dinner party. So look, I'm appealing. If you can help get some money in, that's great. And we're not turning down the small donations. 80% of the $300,000 we've raised came from $20 to $100 donations. So we're still looking for those. But just to get it out early before the election, a nice big check would be very helpful. We could just get it all done. We could finish it and get it out there. But anyway, Enemies Within the Church. You can see it, to find it, you go to enemieswithinthechurch.com, enemieswithinthechurch.com. You can see trailers there. You can see essays and articles. We've just released some exposés of Marxist activity inside the Southern Baptists. Can you believe that?
Yeah, we just brought it up on the screen for you, the website. So,
yeah, that's perfect. So please go and visit there, folks. This is critical. If we lose the churches, we lose America. Simple as that.
Yeah, they've been working hard on the churches for a long time.
Well, we give the whole history of it because, you see, the enemies of America, and you've had America enemies since the Constitution, folks, because America was founded as a religious liberty operation. There were 13 colonies, all run by different denominations, who had fled Europe because of religious persecution. And when they saw King George coming after their freedoms, they knew that their religious liberty was at risk, and they weren't gonna have it. This was not fought over stamp tax, people. It was fought over religious liberty. The black-robed regiments, the pastors with a Bible in one hand and a long rifle in the other. So this in the first time in world history, you had an idea where your rights didn't come from the king or the emperor, your rights came from God. And you had the right to elect a government, to elect representatives to protect your right. Don't you think this offended every tyrant in the world? Because they'd all said, well, I talk to God, and God tells me, you got to go to war for me. God tells me, you got to work 50 hours a week in the fields for me. God tells me that if you disobey me, you're disobeying God. The divine right of kings, they used to call it. Well, the American Revolution disposed with all of that, and you made enemies of every tyrant in the planet. So when communism came along in the early part of the 20th century, and socialism was around way before that, America was the enemy. America was the number one target because they knew they could never run the world while America was a Christian republic. It would always stand against them, would always fight them, would always confound them. And with America's wealth, they knew they were done. They couldn't do it. And they certainly couldn't invade America. So what do? What if you're evil? You're evil, you want to bring an entity down, you get inside. And the churches are the bedrock of America, so they started infiltrating the churches, even before the revolution. The first communist front in America was the Methodist Committee for Social Action, founded by Harry Ward, who became a secret Communist Party member, who was a big man at Union Theological Seminary, very influential Christian. Now, this went right through. The mainstream Protestant churches fell one by one, and a lot of them affiliated to the World Council of Churches, which is run by the Soviet Union, basically the Communist Party of prayer, they used to call it. And so they just all moved to the left, all of them. But a lot of good patriots moved out of the church. They couldn't stomach it, and so and the parallel, the Catholic Church was becoming penetrated because they thought they were immune. They were very anti-communist, and they thought there's no way you can penetrate us because no communist is going to take a lifelong vow of celibacy to become a Catholic priest, because that's the only way you can run the Catholic Church. Well, what they didn't figure was this. A lot of these young communists were homosexual, and they didn't mind not being able to marry, because they're going to have lots of friends when they got into the church, because a lot of their friends were joining the church. Ballard Dodd was a famous American communist who'd been a Catholic, left the Communist Party, went back to Catholicism, and testified before Congress that she personally helped to put 1,100 young priests into the Catholic Church. And by the time of the 60s came around, when Vatican II came out, the big liberal push in the church, these guys were bishops. Some of them were cardinals. And they started to have influence on the College of Cardinals. And this was happening in other countries too. Now you have a communist pope. And I don't call him a left-wing pope or a liberal pope. He is a communist pope. He was involved. He was friends with the Communist Party back in Argentina. Now he's there and he's turning the Catholic Church to the left, embracing Putin, embracing Islam, embracing global warming, refugees, resettlement, open borders, all of the communist playbook. And he is stacking the College of Cardinals with his men because they will choose the next pope. But a lot of these mainstream Christians in America, they moved into the evangelical churches, which were much more straight up Bible believing and much more politically conservative, especially in the South. The Southern Baptists, especially the most conservative, denomination in the country, really. And so, and these crazy Christians kept on doing stuff like voting for Ronald Reagan and even Donald Trump. How can we tolerate this? We've got the universities, we've got Hollywood, we've got the media, we've got the Democrat Party, we've got, the unions. And these crazy Christians, when we've almost got America, vote for these patriots. We've got to stop this. So they have been working overtime in the last 10 years to penetrate and neutralize the evangelicals and the Baptists. Now, this is done through the Gospel Coalition. It's done through some of the big mega churches like the Hybels Church, Willow Creek in Chicago. And I'll offend many people by saying this. It's also done through people like Rick Warren to a degree as well, out in California, Obama's favorite pastor. But the real guts of it is Sojourners, a group out of Washington, D.C., run by a man called Jim Wallace, former member of SDS, Radical, and Obama's faith advisor. Big time supporter of Democratic Socialists of America. He has banned his people out into the evangelical seminaries and the evangelical movement all over the country. Famous Christians like Shane Claiborne. He's part of Sojourners. He's also tied to a group, a Stalinist group called the League of Revolutionaries for a New America, used to be called the Communist Labor Party. And this dreadlocked Christian is a megastar amongst a lot of young Christians. He is a communist sympathizer tied to Stalinists. But, you know, he gets on these Christian conferences and he's a hip, cool, you know, the voice of modern Christianity. I'll give you an example too. The Southern Baptists recently passed a thing, and this is done under Russell Moore and the Ethics Commission of the Southern Baptists. They got rid of Paige Patterson, the conservative, with some Me Too garbage thing, and they've been purging all the good conservatives. And they, under Walter Strickland out of Southeastern Baptist, at the convention in Alabama earlier this year, they passed critical race theory as part of the toolbox of the Baptist Church. Well, what is that? That is Marxism. That is the idea that if you're white, you're automatically racist. Racism is about the white Christian capitalist power structure. Anybody who's part of that is a racist. Anybody who isn't. So to destroy racism, you have to destroy the white Christian capitalist society. It's the Marxism. It's just, instead of the workers and the bosses, it's now the white capitalist Christians versus the people of color and the workers, right? Now that's in the Southern Baptists now. It's in the seminaries. It's all over the country. It's completely in. So's social justice. So's refugee resettlement. So's all of this. So's open borders. It's all part of the churches now. And all the young pastors are being indoctrinated in this. We're going to lose the churches in 5 to 10 years, if that, the way this is going. And just by the way, the man who invented critical race theory was Don, I've just forgotten his name now. But anyway, he wrote a book called, he was a Marxist, he wrote a book called The Black Church and Marxism. What do they have to offer each other? And he went to Cuba in 1982 to meet Fidel Castro and a whole bunch of communist Christian organizations, the Christian Peace Crusade, which is a Soviet front, the Cuban church, the Cuban, which is controlled by the Cuban KGB. And the man who accompanied him was a man called Jeremiah Wright from Chicago, Obama's pastor. So what I tried to do is give you an overview of the political ramifications we're facing, the war on us from China, and the internal war we are facing through the colleges, through the media, whatever, but now through the churches. How many people do you know who've slaved and slaved and slaved to send their son to seminary school, Bible college, and he comes back a semi-atheist? He comes back a social justice warrior. He's all woke. This is happening all over because the American Bible colleges and seminaries are now where the American universities were 10 years ago, right? There's still a few good ones, but they're mainly getting Marxist. In 10 years, they'll all be Marxist, like 99% of the universities are now. But I've gone on a long time, so probably too long, but I'll call it quits there and we'll turn it up for questions or comments or criticisms or blowback if you have any.
Well, no blowback. I'm amazed at what a fire hose of information you are.
It's just getting warmed up.
On a sad note, one of our mutual heroes was murdered a couple months ago, Phil Haney. And
well, I don't know I don't know it was murder, but there's certainly suspicions. But
yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm pretty jaded these days, so I'll
look. If you had to bet, yeah, but until I get the actual proof, I'm reluctant to say so. But
yeah, I understand. One of the questions I get a lot is what the heck are the Islamists and the communists? Why are they joining forces? Because ideologically, conservatives are actually probably more in tune with many of the social traits of the Islamists.
Yeah.
And I love your answer. I've watched a lot of your videos, so I thought I'd cue you in for that one.
Yeah, well, look, yeah, socially, you'd think, family values and, sort of a good family structure and charity and all this. They are quite close to Christians in some ways. But if you compare the two religions, they're very, very different. Christianity is a confession of faith. You have to believe. You have to believe. Islam is submission. You have to submit. You have to submit your will to Allah. It's completely top down and hierarchical. Christianity is you talking to God. Islam is God talk through his prophet and all his imams, and you do what you are told. And your way to heaven is spreading Islam across the world. Now, the other major difference is Islam is the only major world religion, if you can call it a religion, that mandates, doesn't just say it's okay, they command you to spread Islam by force. And all Islamic countries became Islamic either by force or immigration. You never get a knock on your door with a Muslim missionary saying, look, how would you like to come to a mosque? We're having a coffee evening this Friday night. We'd love to see you along, bring your, we'll talk about the Quran and, bring your kids.
Yeah, that's not happening.
No, that doesn't happen because they don't have much to sell. It's not pleasant. See, and the other thing in Islam is if you decide you want to leave your church, you leave your church. Whether it's to become an atheist, an agnostic, or just to shift to another church. You decide to leave Islam, that's punishable by death. This is not your normal religion. See, when I came to this country, I had to swear an oath that I'd never belonged to any communist or Nazi group that sought to overthrow or undermine the US Constitution. Well, if you're a Muslim who believes in Sharia law, which is the law of Islam, you are commanded to spread Sharia law across the world. That is in direct contravention to the US. You are working to undermine the US Constitution. So I think you should be denied. If a communist can't come here and a Nazi can't come here, neither should a Sharia compliant Muslim be able to come here. This is political. We're not, nobody protests about Buddhists. Nobody protests about Sikhs. Nobody protests about Hindus. People get upset about Islam because Islam is a violent political philosophy that seeks to dominate. Yes, it's got a religious aspect, but it's political and it's economic and it's military and it openly seeks to dominate the world. Who would invite Nazis into their country, But we're inviting people who believe in this into the country. Yeah. So isn't there a lot of similarities between communism and Islam if you get to it?
Oh, yeah.
They're both top-down, totalitarian. You do what you're told. They both want world domination. We'll see the Muslim Brotherhood, which was founded in the 1920s, to rebuild the caliphate, to have world domination. They worked with the Nazis during World War II. But then the Nazis got beaten, so they threw in with the Soviets. And the Soviets taught them their KGB tradecraft. And they trained them in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. They set up the Palestine Liberation Organization, Hamas, and later Al-Qaeda and ISIS. This garbage that CIA set up ISIS. It was the KGB that set up ISIS. And also when the Russians took over, the Soviets took over Russia, they went down hard on the Christian churches, but they didn't touch Islam because they knew they would get a revolt if they did. So what they did is they infiltrated communist agents into the madrasas, into the mosque, and created Soviet Islam. And that was used to infiltrate the Middle East and set up terror groups. Even today, this is how they set up ISIS, for instance, out of the Caucasus, the Muslims in the Caucasus. So, so I say that the Soviets and the Russians still control Islam. Some of my friends say, no, it's more like a partnership. Some say, no, the Muslims will take out the communists one day. Either way, they're working together right now against us. They might fight each other over our corpses, but that's a little bit late. No,
Yeah.
Rashida Tlaib. They go, she's a Muslim, she's crazy Palestinian. She's also a communist.
Oh,
She's
yeah.
been a communist for a long time. Ilhan Omar is a communist. The head of CARE, Nihad Awad, he was a communist before he was a Muslim radical. He was a member of a pro-Soviet front group. But then the Soviet Union sort of collapsed, so he shifted to Hamas. They all have communist roots, the red-green axis, and they're all working together to bring down America and bring down Israel.
Yeah, the other thing they have in common is the ends justify the means. That seems to be the biggest common thread for me.
Yeah. Their moral system is completely antithetical to Christianity. God, and the Bible says, do not evil that good may come of it. That's the opposite of the end justifies the means.
Exactly.
Do not evil that good may come of it. Well, they follow the exact opposite philosophy. Anything is okay as long as it serves the caliphate or the revolution. In fact, it's moral. In fact, you're immoral if you treat your enemy charitably.
Yeah, well, it's built into their whole ethos that it's okay to do whatever to a Christian because they're a non-believer, and you can say whatever, do whatever. The Iran deal, they were all laughing over there because they had pulled the same thing they had done a couple of 100 years before. They were just going to wait out 10 years and then start dropping bombs.
And Obama gave them $150 billion,
to finance it. Yeah. I still think a whole lot of that money came back to Obama somehow.
I'm sure there were kickbacks. I'm sure, and I've heard stories about that. Yeah, and that's probably right. But still, a lot of it, it was like basically giving $150 billion to Nazi Germany in 1938. That was the moral and political equivalent. It was just a treasonous act, and it happened because you got so many of your congressmen and senators are getting Iranian money right now. Iranian money helped to elect 4 congressmen in 2018, 3 in Southern California and 1 in Virginia. And nothing's stopping them.
Well, I have a sneaky suspicion that if we do win this next election, and I'm very hopeful we will, we're going to see a lot of good stuff happen because we'll have an unfettered Trump, and
that's exactly what I say.
And there was a little tidbit information a lot of people really don't know about Trump is he was good friends with John Kennedy Jr. Before he died, and for quite a few years. And in that relationship, he was introduced to a man who was the chief aide for McCarthy back in the 50s.
Roy Cohn, yep.
And Trump knows him very well and knows everything that transpired back then. And I had to chuckle because I knew that tidbit of information before he announced. And when I saw the reaction of the left when that hit, I knew exactly what was going on because he had their number. And so I've been smiling about that ever since. And a lot of people don't know that. And
look, Trump knew more about communism probably coming to office than any president has known, probably since Reagan, because Reagan fought it in the Writers Guilds, but Trump knew it probably even more. Look, this is the point I make, we're wondering, what are we going to do in the next 6 months? Am I going to take a holiday in the Bahamas? Am I going to play some golf, visit the grandchildren, or am I going to work my little butt off to elect this president? Now, you think if we lose, we're in a spiral to hell. But we win. You imagine Trump with the House, a couple more good senators in the Senate, so he doesn't have to put up with Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins. He will be unleashed.
That's right.
He's already making big moves against China. He's already cutting off things, or I can't keep up with the things he's doing. He's doing a whole bunch of good stuff that never gets reported because there's no way that the media is ever going to give him credit for anything. And you imagine this too. You imagine, he's put more judges in the circuits around the country than any other, good ones. Thanks to him, we have a 5-4 majority in the Supreme Court. And we know Roberts is a flake, but he still votes our way more than, the first real majority for 60 years. But Trump gets reelected. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is getting pretty old, isn't she? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, do you think she's going to last another 4 years under Trump? She's already. This is my offer to America. You saved us in World War II. This is what I'll do for you, right? Well, she has publicly said that she would like to go and live in New Zealand. I'd like to retire in New Zealand. Well, I'm willing to take one for the team. You send her down to New Zealand, she can play bingo all day long, and you will have a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, well,
imagine what that would do for your religious liberties, your gun rights, all the onerous regulations that are suppressing you. You'll be unleashed.
There's 2 other hard left Supreme Court justices who are pretty old too. So it's very possible.
Breyer's
right up there. And
Breyer used to have a Maoist as one of his assistants.
Yeah, yep. It's unbelievable. I pull information off your videos and share it with as many people as I can. Not always giving you credit for it necessarily.
No, look, I don't care.
But people don't believe me. And one thing about your books they're extremely well documented, and I'd like you to, before we get off here, just as one last, and we may even cut this part off and put it at the very beginning of the video here, but talk about how well documented your books and your movies are.
Yeah, well, look, and again, another plug for White House Reds. But this is how I do it, folks. I do spend a lot of time on the internet. I studied communism for 30 years in New Zealand. So when Obama came along, I was the first to finger him as a communist. I fingered his relationship with Hawaiian Frank Marshall Davis, and I found that deep in the Communist Party website, very deep. So but since then, this is what I've done. I've got a website called KeyWiki, KeyWiki. Got 127,000 pages on it, all files of communists, socialists, senators, congressmen, all blue linked, all referenced. Because what I do was what I do, my wife and a few others in the team. Every town has a few communists in it. Every town, of any size, and they're atheists, right? So when they get old, they're thinking, what's my life worth? My life is worth what I leave behind me. So when they get old, they gather all their papers up, their letterheads, their membership books, their correspondence with congressmen or whatever, and they donate them to a library because they think in 100 years' time, somebody's going to come along and write a great book about their wonderful revolutionary life, maybe even make a movie. Yep. And that's what keeps them warm, Well, my wife and I and others go along, we copy thousands of pages, thousands and thousands and thousands of pages, and we put it on KeyWiki and other sites, and we cross-link it, and that's how we find the connections. I'll give you one example. Now, in Washington State, in 1946, and they used to say Washington was so communist then, they talked about the 47 states and the 47 states and the Soviet of Washington. Okay, this guy was a Democrat congressman, Hugh DeLacy, and a secret Communist Party member. Okay, so he gets kicked out, goes and settles in a little town in Northern California near Santa Cruz. And a few years later, he's corresponding all around the world, and he strikes up a friendship and a correspondence with a local freshman congressman. And this goes on for years, and they're writing letters. And I'm reading these letters because I'm reading Hugh DeLacy's papers, right? And these letters start talking about military stuff. And one letter talks about a military report that was sent to Mr. DeLacy to look at, sort of saying, you're not really supposed to see this, but get it back to me, right? So he sends him a military report. And a lot of this went on for years, right? And then I find that this gentleman is also corresponding with 4 people who have been named as communist spies, 2 in China and one in Washington and 1 elsewhere, but all former Soviet spies, or 2 of them were still working for the Chinese, right, in China. He was corresponding with, he went to visit them in China. At the same time, he was corresponding and having a friendship with his congressman. Well, that congressman's name was Leon Panetta. He became Obama's head of the CIA and Secretary of Defense. This is the kind of thing you find when you do this stuff. No, do you think I'd say any of this stuff if I didn't have evidence to back it up? Well, I'd come from New Zealand to come to America and tell you that 20% of your congressmen are working for the other team. You think I'd do that without a bit of evidence?
No, not at all.
No, I've never been challenged on my evidence. I've been criticized, I've been attacked, but I haven't been challenged on my evidence.
No, they don't dare get in an argument with you on that one.
No, they don't.
John Brennan, that's in the news a lot, and a lot of people don't know that he's a converted Islamist and full-fledged communist.
He voted for the Communist Party, and another thing I just found out recently. During the 90s, there was a hardcore leftist out of the Institute for Policy Studies who Clinton tried to put on his national security team, and the Senate rebelled. He was such a radical, such a security risk, they wouldn't pass him. Well, he was the one who recommended Brennan for Obama's security team.
Wow.
The man was called Anthony Lake. So this guy admitted to voting for the Communist Party. This is how it came about. This is how bad it is. Brennan was at a meeting with college students, and they were talking about intelligence matters. And one young guy got up and said, "Look, I'm a campus radical. I am so hard left, it's unbelievable. But I'd really like to work in the intelligence services. Will my background hold me back?" And Brennan says, "Nah, you'll be fine. Look, when I applied, I told them I'd voted for the Communist Party, and they still let me in."
Wow. Yeah.
So you think the CIA is all, going to guard you? The CIA has been penetrated since its foundation. And now the FBI, which was much more reliable, that's clearly been penetrated too. Comey used to call himself a communist at college.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That great book by Diana West, American Thread, Red Thread. She goes into the background of all these anti-Trump people, and a whole bunch of them have pro-Soviet backgrounds. A whole bunch. The deep state comes out of Moscow. That's my opinion, and it still does. The Democrats, the Russians have been interfering in American elections since the 1930s. But always on the side of the Democrats.
Oh, yeah.
The Chinese are heavily invested in several states. They just helped to flip Virginia. They've been trying to flip Florida. This is Chinese, pro-Chinese communists working with stuff out of Chinese universities are flipping states. Iran is buying up your congressman and electing congressmen. Foreign interference has been going on for decades. But no, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, nobody applies it.
Yeah, I suspect that George Soros is actually a front for a lot of communist countries, funneling
Yeah,
money through him so that everybody focuses on Soros and they don't know where the
absolutely.
money he's
Yeah,
laundering. And they've declared war on Texas, right? And we've already got right here in Allen, Texas, we've got a full blown California communist on the city council. Got snuck in because everybody took a big breath, after Trump got elected, and it happened.
yeah,
And they've had 5 or 7 hardcore um, groups funnel in here, and they're working their little fannies off to turn Allen and Plano and the rest of us. They're starting at the lower ranks, and
yeah.
then that's where they groom their House of Representatives. And one of the cherries of Texas is our Senate seat here in Allen, because it's been the one that has funneled some really good conservative legislatures into the leadership in Austin. And so we've got a big bullseye on us here, and that's part of why this
Yeah.
video.
Yeah, well, look, if they can flip Texas, it's over for America. You take the electoral college votes from Texas and the electoral college votes from California, which they already have, you combine that, Republicans can never win again. That's
Yeah,
it.
it's
It's
game
gone.
over. Yeah,
And with through Battleground Texas, the Texas Organizing Project, Jolt Texas, the communists are working through all these organizations with lots of money from Soros and other, the Democracy Alliance, which is a collection of left-wing billionaires. And I believe you're right that this money is coming from overseas. It gets funneled through them, through Soros in particular. And they are working like crazy to flip Texas. That's why Ted Cruz was almost, Beto O'Rourke, who shouldn't be elected dog catcher, almost took out Ted Cruz. 3 points difference. It should have been a 20-point race.
well, we have about 4 or 5 really corrupt Democrat counties here in Texas, and Harris County
Yeah, and Houston,
is
yeah.
probably the worst in Houston. And there was an exorbitant amount of votes come out of that county down there for Beto O'Rourke, and I've got to believe they were probably mail-in type ballots.
Yeah. Well, see, Harris, yeah. Well, Harris County, the Texas Organizing Project is very big there, and they used to be called Acorn. Okay, but they are run by Rosie Castro
Yeah.
and the Communist Party USA.
Yeah.
And they are signing up tens of thousands of Black and Latino voters. And obviously they'll be committing all sorts of fraud. But this is communism. These people are communists.
Yes.
And they almost beat Ted Cruz. Well, if they get a good enough candidate, they will beat John Cornyn.
Oh.
Cornyn's not as strong as Ted Cruz.
Mm-mm.
So, you're in Texas. See, this is the thing, that the communist wave is at its peak. It's either going to overwhelm us or it's going to recede. And if we put up a strong enough wall, it will recede and it will go back to, we can actually push it back many, many years.
Yeah.
So it isn't as though if we beat them once, we got to keep beating them all the time. Well, we do have to keep on guard all the time. But they're at their peak right now. And they were in their peak in the 30s and the 40s. But when we crushed them, it took them 30 years to rebuild. And if we crush them now, and then we get on top of them and defund them and go after their treason and their illegal practices, we will set them back 50 years. And we can go back to being fat, lazy Americans, for a while. I'm not being serious, because if we have learned anything in the last few years, it's this, that vigilance is the price of liberty, and even America can be taken down if people take their eye off the ball.
That's right.
If I told you 15 years ago, within 15 years America will be on the verge of a communist revolution, you would have laughed me out of the country.
I wouldn't have, but
Well, you might not have, but I'd say 99% of Americans would.
but I know exactly what you're saying, because
Yeah.
I still get people look at me. I quit calling Democrats about, I don't know, 8 years ago, and just started calling them communists.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And we
it
should.
it offends some people. And then I start to explain to them, why shouldn't we call them that? Because every part of their platform is right out of the communist playbook.
There is no difference between the Democrat policy today and the Communist Party policy on their website or Democratic Socialists of America.
That's exactly
That's
right.
where, Obamacare came out of the communist movement. Immigration amnesty came out of the communist movement. The Iran nuclear deal came out of the communist movement. The Green New Deal came out of the communist movement. It's all communist now.
And when you go back and you look at, back in the mid 60s, they entered into Congress the 45 goals of the Communist Party.
Yeah.
And you just sit there and you read through it and you go, check, check,
whoop.
check. And a lot of that stuff is re-emerging in the forms of the Green New Deal and all that, which is a playoff of what they were trying to do with the 45.
Yeah, it came out of Roosevelt's New Deal, and that was very heavily communist infiltrated. But you think about this, 90% of Americans still don't understand that Obama is a communist.
I know.
He was in there for 8 years as a communist, ruling as a communist, doing the communist bidding. He's got a lifetime history of the communists. 90% of Americans still do not know that.
Yeah.
Is that unbelievable or what?
It is. That's the problem. Has always been the mainstream media are completely absorbed by the communist left. So and the CIA recruited them right out of university. It's amazing, but we need to probably cut this loose. I could probably talk the rest of the night about this stuff, because I eat, drink, and breathe it, and hopefully we'll make a dent in it. And I can't thank you enough for all your hard work. I know this is a passion for you, and just watching you go through your talk, it just it gets us going again, because you present it with such passion, and it's like, this guy's from New Zealand and he loves America more than I do, so I got to do something. So I can't thank you enough for giving us the time tonight, and I pray for you. I've got a pretty good list of patriots like yourself that I pray for all the time to stay safe, because
thank you.
Like I said, the ends justify the means in the other camp's world. So
yeah, it is. Well, the only thing more dangerous than doing what we're doing, Steve, is not
doing nothing.
It's doing nothing. It's not doing it.
That's right. And I've got a grandbaby due in November, I that's just for them.
Well, that's what motivates me. Like, I'm 62 years old. What are they going to do to me? But I got kids. You got kids. You got grandchildren. How can you bear to hand them over to what they are planning, and not do something about it? How could you look them in the face?
Well, I think that's a perfect place to leave it right there. So again, thank you so much, and we'll be talking.
Thank you, sir. Pleasure.
God bless.